What's going on, y'all? Today, I want to answer the question: are psychedelics always spiritual? Do they always lead to some spiritual awakening or facilitate a spiritual experience? I have done in the past 2 years, starting October 2022, over 2 dozen psychedelic journeys. Most of them were psychedelic therapy or guided journeys. And then the others that I'm going to include in that number were self guided, not entirely recreational. I was not going out and about, but there was a specific focus and intention behind my journeying, so to speak. I was just hanging out with a friend of mine, talking about what books we're reading. He mentioned that he's reading something about psychedelics. He himself does not have any firsthand experience with them. And in hearing his descriptions of what he's reading, what he's getting out of it, and his commentary on why he doesn't have any firsthand experiences with it, a lot of the common theme in all of that was in spiritual pursuit. He's a very deeply spiritual guy. He was saying, I never needed it for that. And I am very similar in that regard. And what I mentioned to him was that I had never had a spiritual experience despite my relatively, possibly, however you could say objectively, substantial and very intentional psychedelic use. And the reason that psychedelics are not always spiritual, and that they never were for me, goes back to the first thing that any experienced psychedelic practitioner, facilitator will tell you, which is that the medicine is going to show you what you need. I have been deeply aware of the presence of God and of my relationship with God for my entire life. I like to explain to people that my current path, as I have identified it, because it has intensified in that 2 years, but not as a result of anything that I experienced in a journey, more life stuff. There's a reason that I was doing the journeys in the first place. And the main thing that I got out of all of these journeys was profound emotional awareness and emotional access, because that is what I needed. So what I want to do here is explain the different types of medicines, psychedelics, the different trips that I had, takeaways that I got from each one, and also touch on the way that these different substances, the way that these substances differ, because there is no one particular substance that is better or worse than another. Just like whatever you are going to get out of it, the way that you would pick what you're going to use is totally dependent on your intention. So, let's begin. I was dead set against using psychedelics because there was somebody very close to me who had a bad trip when we were kids. And just like I have been always aware of my relationship to God, the presence of God in my life, very much appreciated it and respected it. I was also very aware that I love my mind, so much. I'm so grateful for it. And psychedelics, I saw, were a way to destabilize that thing that I loved so much. And so I never looked any further into them than just hearing, seeing, observing his experience and being like, that is definitely not for me. I will try some other drugs, but I will not mess with hallucinogens. No, thank you. In hindsight, the way that trip was set up was really not optimal. One of the key reasons being the brain is not fully formed yet. The other reason being set and setting matter a great deal. So now, as an experienced psychedelic user, if I were to be talking to somebody who was in the same situation that this person was back in the day, I would say, dude, you don't want to do that for these reasons, for all these reasons. There's a lot of risk there that can be controlled. In addition to the asymmetric risk of, there is something that you can't control. But I have never had a bad trip. So I'll touch on that as well. So how did I go from being definitely far from a square, but staunchly against psychedelics to really enjoying them? Well, like many people who make dramatic shifts and find things that are very positive that they otherwise turned their noses up towards, I was at rock bottom. So I was at rock bottom and I was like, you know what? Maybe everything that I have ever thought is totally wrong, and I'm just going to do something that I would never do. So somebody offered me some shrooms, and it was not going to be in a loud, crazy way. It was in a very controlled setting, in a nice apartment, pleasant experience. Or rather, it was a pleasant environment in which to venture into that most exciting unknown, my mind. I tried some micro doses before, and I had never noticed anything, even though the people that I was with, we had tried 2 grams, I believe was this dose each previously. I was like, I get a little bit of, I guess there's some visuals happening here for a second. It's like brightened, but I'm not really noticing anything else. And I'm actively looking for placebo effect, but I'm also wanting to partake in that experience. So at this experience in this friend's apartment, I take 3.5 grams, which is the standard journey dose. I wait 40 minutes. I'm like, I am not getting anything. Let me take about half as much. So now I have 5 grams in my system. Now here's the thing. When you think about hallucinogens, maybe I'm alone in this, but my conception of visuals was that things are going to be melting, things are going to be appearing, basically a severe schizophrenic episode. This was far from that, because though I was on a hero dose, the most intense visuals that I had, even at the peak of the experience, were, wow, is that building is that breathing? Whoa, colors are a little, it looks like it's like an Instagram filter or something. Interesting. Nothing super crazy. The super crazy, like I mentioned, not spiritual. The super crazy was what I felt and what I started to feel. This was before I knew that I could enhance and sharpen my experience by sitting down to clarify what it was that I was seeking, setting an intention. And so I more or less YOLO'd into this. And what I received was so profound, and I will never be the same again. I felt emotions in a way that I do not consciously recall feeling up until that point. And I would say I've always been a very emotional person. And I would say that I have always been empathetic. But you can't really be empathetic for others, truly at a deep level, until you can be empathetic with yourself. And you can't be empathetic with yourself until you have awareness of and access to all of the emotions that you are feeling at any given time. I remember in this experience thinking about people for whom at the present moment I had such hate. And when they popped into my mind, it was totally absent. Not only was it totally absent, but it was what I had instead was tremendous care and compassion and awareness that there's nothing that I could do to save them from the pain that I knew that they were in. But that pain that I knew that they were in was no longer intellectual. I felt it for them. I felt what that would be like. And the weight of that was so much greater than the hatred that I had for them. There's this interesting concept or idea that applies to everything, that exposure is expansion. We are limited in our understanding by what we've been exposed to. It's like the 4-minute mile. Everybody thought that that was going to be impossible, physically impossible for humans to accomplish until somebody broke it. And then after that person broke it, a bunch of other people started breaking it. And so one of the things about psychedelics, no matter what it is that you need, because it is finite, you are only going to have those drugs in your system for a certain amount of time, depending on what you take. Ketamine, it's like 45 minutes, really, when you're in the trip. DMT felt like infinity, apparently was a minute and a half. LSD, never tried it, but that's apparently 12 hours. Mushrooms, 4 to 8 hours. Ayahuasca, never tried it. Apparently that's a 12-hour guide too. So exposure is expansion. And so I can't speak to having a spiritual experience in psychedelics, but I can speak to having a tremendous emotional cracking open in them. And that's important because once you are exposed to it, then you can't unsee it, whether you are in a journey or not. You always then have more streamlined access to this place that otherwise, or that had until then been closed off to you. And I remember having some thoughts toward myself, thoughts of such grace and compassion, and I started to cry, not sobbing, just releasing. We cry or we laugh when we are overwhelmed and surprised. Or at least we laugh when we are surprised and when surprise means truth. Maybe we cry because we are overwhelmed. Maybe it's the same thing. I don't know. A guy who knows way more about that than I do says that they're connected, that the ha-ha muscle is right next to the weepy muscle. I started thinking about some things in my life. And I just released, and it felt so good. And so that was, for me, the beginning of this psychedelic journey, or of my journey into psychedelics, no pun intended, but also the beginning of my journey to become aware of and to get in touch with, in this more real way, my emotions. I can't speak for the female experience, though I do learn a lot about it and I continue to be curious about it. But the male experience is that emotion bad. Men don't cry. Men don't complain. Men don't blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of validity to that. But without proper nuance, which those imparted lessons always lack, without nuance, there are too many variables left unchecked or unconsidered that leave that message subject to be wildly misunderstood. Because everybody has emotions. Emotions and hormones basically run your life in a lot of ways, or they have a tremendous impact on your decision making and your overall quality of life, your enjoyment. So while I can say that I was very emotional my entire life, no matter what I was experiencing internally, it always ended up coming out in a pretty limited way and largely unproductive way. For men, we are allowed to experience one emotion in particular, and that is anger. Anger is okay. Anger's good. And however anger shows up, screaming, physical violence. I was never a physically violent person. I yelled a lot. I destroyed a lot of relationships, or I damaged a lot of relationships because not only was I unable to really identify what I was feeling, but then the only thing that I was aware of feeling and that I thought that I was allowed or would be cool to express was anger. And the only way that I knew how to express it was yelling. So I had this tremendous experience, and then I was like, you know what? Let's target it. Let's make it really focused. Let's go do this in a clinical way because I want to weaponize this. I know I got a lot to unpack and a lot that I want to explore because I am, if nothing else, just endlessly curious and found something inside of me that I didn't know anything about, but that I knew I sensed had tremendous power. So I was like, let's get curious and focused about this. So this message is brought to you by Celsius. So then I was like, now where in Texas, I was in Austin at the time, living there. I was like, now where in Texas could I go to find a clinic so that I could do this in a guided fashion? Really set the intention, really make a plan, figure out what we need to go after and how we need to go after it. And of course, take an even bigger dose. Bigger, better. There is no legal psilocybin facilities in Texas. I don't believe so right now, October 2024, and there definitely weren't then. But what there was a legal ketamine clinic. The clinic that I chose was fantastic. Illuma. I got to know the owner, Allie. She's awesome. Fantastic experience, fantastic people. Just people committed to healing and non-judgmental, really cool. So I go in there and they recommend me to a shrink because I was also looking for, I guess, a shrink at that point. And I wanted one who was familiar with psychedelic journeys so that there could be a lot of continuity there. I wanted to do this as guided, as right, as targeted as possible. I ended up going to Connected Heart Therapy, which practices primarily EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's very complementary to psychedelic therapy and ketamine. So I go down the wild road of the subconscious via EMDR with, shout out, Wendy Bird. She's the best. And then Wendy and I go to Illuma. So I did my first 7 ketamine trips in this clinic. There are 3 ways to deliver ketamine. There's intramuscular, like a shot. There's intravenous, needle hooked up to you, and there's oral. So I've tried all 3. Intramuscular has its moments of intensity, but there's a little bit of, oh, yeah, and then you peak for a minute and then you're down. Intravenous is like you are right into the thick of it and you stay in the thick of it for your entire trip. Oral, honestly, I was taking what seems to be a somewhat heavier dose, 900 milligrams. Oral, I would be like, I'm pretty sure I'm just meditating. If I didn't have the taste of these drugs in my mouth, I would think I was just meditating. So ketamine is a dissociative. And one thing that always stood out to me about ketamine, because your eyes are closed, you've got headphones on, you're really in your head, so to speak. One good way of describing ketamine or comparing ketamine to any of these other psychedelics is like this. If we go back to my initial big mushroom trip, right? I would just have a thought and it would connect. Always. I would have a thought and it would just connect to a million other thoughts, the way that your brain normally works, except that with those thoughts, there would be this emotional awareness, release, etc. Ketamine, best way that I can describe it is like mushrooms, have a thought, connecting. Ketamine is like you have a thought and it just hangs there alone and nothing happens. And I could be like, no, come on. Put another thought in there. Like, connect this other thought. No, it just hangs there by itself. And so what that allows for you to do is for you to get perspective in a different way. One of the thoughts that I had during one of my trips was, what if this is just not that big of a deal? What if it's just not that serious? And that's one of those things that you might not be able to consider without that distance, without that ability to disassociate from whatever it is that you are working through. That is one of those things that stayed with me, because the most important part of non-recreational, or really any journey, because you can have insights recreationally, the most important part of any journey is the integration, what you do with the information that you have received and how diligently you apply it outside of your trip. So that it's not that serious, as it came to me, became a sort of mantra or a reminder. It's not that serious. None of this is that serious. And the cool part about this stuff is that it's all coming from you. It's really just and EMDR as well, although it's manual, is just the lowering of your conscious mind and the elevating of your subconscious mind. The lowering of the defenses to see what is really there in a way that needs to be investigated, that needs to be shared, that you need to be exposed to. So, the way that they dose you is obviously they take your size into effect. I weigh around 200 pounds. I started at, I think, 85 milligrams. Next time I went in, a couple weeks later, we bumped that up. I did a third one, bumped that up. At which point I was like, all right, let's go to the IV, because I was still very conscious of time. I was like, okay, it's probably been 20 minutes or whatever. Well, then they put the IV in me, and they're able to do this thing where they sort of front load, or it's like they hit the nitrous oxide on it. You get to the peak state faster, and then you stay there. So at this point, I'm around 100 and some milligrams. In my experience, so my first 3 times doing ketamine, I was terrified. Oh, right. Go back to that thing about I love my mind. What if I never come back? Whatever. Even though every time I came back, And I always have that distinct moment of, back, it's normal. Great. I'm good. Wow, that was really pleasant. I'm so relaxed. Got so much nice new stuff to think about, new perspectives to apply and consider. So by the fourth time I was chilling. I was like, great, let's do it. Let's go. This is going to be a good time. No fear. And then I became aware of, because it was so distinct, so much more powerful, this fourth time, because of the increased dose and the new delivery method. I liken it to the moment in the movie Get Out when the guy when he's going into the sunken place. Right? So you're sitting in this chair, chilling, vibing. And then I could feel like I got kicked back and like I was going, going into the sunken place. I'm like, I know that I didn't pull the lever on this recliner. I'm still sitting, kind of leaned back on an incline. But I feel like I am falling. And there's very, very interesting visuals, unique to ketamine, that I would get every time. They were not always the same, but they were thematically the same. It was like, you got your brain and then you've got all the little divots and crevices in there, little rivers. And it was like you're going on a tour through each one of them. And you're in a sort of car, like it's a small world, you're in the ride. And all around, it's like gears, heavy industrial machinery. And you're just watching. It's wild. Really fascinating. So one thing that I was in pursuit of was ego death. I don't know if I ever had the ego death, because the accounts that I have read don't really track with my experience. Back to the original point, maybe ego death is not what I needed. Who knows? Or maybe I had it and it wasn't as scary or profound as I thought. The closest thing that I can think of in the ketamine experience, because after a certain point in the dosing, you can't really bring anything back. So one of the higher doses that I ended up journeying on, I had the most interesting, kind of jarring experience. That was like, right, I'm on the ride, seeing what's going on. But now, instead of the gears, the heavy industrial machinery, it's like I'm on a ski lift or something. And I'm looking down at mankind walking around. And I remember thinking to myself, what are they doing all day? Like, they just move these meat suits, lumber around, like do stuff and then power down and then wake up and do it all again. Like, what? I could not intellectually grasp the concept of it. I was like, I'm so close to understanding, but I can't quite understand. And then I started to see that I started to become aware that their minds, 100% of their minds, of their beings, were focused on acquiring these gold coins, like in Super Mario. Ding, ding. And I was like, that's it. That's it. They just focus everything on that, and this everything else doesn't even make sense. And why are we to do what with all this? And again, I was exposed to this in such a powerful way. I used to explain this as like, you know something here in your head, but you don't really know it here, right? In your heart and your soul. The terminology for that I really like, I got out of my experience at an SN Goenka Vipassana retreat, which is, as he calls it, experiential knowledge. So I, for the first time, had this experiential knowledge that I had definitely been experiencing, but I had been overlooking, or that I wasn't aware of, which was, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. Maybe not what people are doing, but what I am doing and the way that I'm looking at my life doesn't make any sense. And it was right then that I started to think, there's more in my life that I need to change, and with more urgency than I thought of, than I knew. Then I had some other nice experiences on ketamine with the orals, because then I changed up how I was journeying. Because in the clinical setting, I would meet with my therapist. We talk about just how am I doing and clarify what it is that I want to get out of a trip. Afterwards, as soon as I came out, she's right there, perfect sweet angel, and I'd mumble some gibberish about whatever it was that I saw. I was like, the color blue, whatever. Like, that's it. I mean, nothing to somebody else, but in that moment, it meant everything to me. It represented so much. Later on, when I switched to Mind Bloom, which delivers via oral, sublingual tablets, I started not recording by speaking, because I felt very much that to speak would pull me out of the experience. So some of these journals around here, I would just keep a little journal like on my chest if I was laying down or like next to me, and I would just scratch, be like, I'll interpret that later. Scratch whatever it was that was coming into my head. One of the things that came into my head was get to truth faster, which was powerful then, but the more that I think about it and the more that I apply it and look for application for it, just profound, and applies to so much, whether it's communication, like get to the point of what you are saying and say it as succinctly as possible, as powerfully as possible, or whether it is the practice of being on stage. I saw Patrick Page do his one-man show earlier this year, or late last year, and it happened to be a talkback performance, Q&A. And I asked him, hey, in your process as an actor, how do you know when you have gotten to truth in a moment? Right away, he was like, oh, you have an emotional response to it. Okay. Seeing how these things are connected. So somewhere in between there, actually it was like 2 weeks after my original big mushroom trip, I tried DMT. So there was no profound download of a message, but the experience was pretty wild. And here we're going to talk about how to avoid bad trips. And now a word from our sponsors. Celsius. Stimulants keep you closer to God. It's actually not true. I had a big perspective shift on that from my MDMA experience, which we'll get to. So DMT. It's in the same setting with the same folks, and I just had a great first psychedelic experience, so I was like, yo, dude, I could do it. Let's go. And you basically smoke DMT out of a crack pipe. You freebase it. Now, here's the thing. I am a professional opera singer. My breath control, my lung capacity, tremendous. In the days, my younger days, when I would smoke the devil's lettuce, and we would smoke the devil's lettuce out of a bong, we would have bong ripping contests. And one thing that I learned, everybody wins in a bong ripping contest. There are no losers. But by volume, the opera singer is going to win in terms of how much I can generate, how much I can clear and take and hold. So, of course, it's not unlike shotgunning a beer. I don't drink anymore. Been 8 years. But I can shotgun a beer. So, DMT, we loaded up and taking big old opera singer rip. And as the smoke is going through the pipe, right to my mouth, I had a thought. I was like, no, dude, this is not that. This is the kind of thing that can scramble your brain and you're never going to come back from it. This is dangerous, bro. What are you doing, Michael? Michael. Remember, I'm so open now. I'm just like, it's this deep part of me that I care about. giving me this warning. I was like, can't be having those thoughts right now, dude. That's how you have a bad trip. Just instinctively, I knew it. And another principle of the psychedelic world is the phrase, trust, let go, be open. It's hard to describe, and maybe not everybody works like this. Let's just assume they don't work like this. But if this is how I envision it for myself, maybe this will be helpful. I just imagine literally doing all that, just going along with the flow. Whatever happens, it's going to be okay. I am not going to die, and there's nothing that comes up that I can't handle. And let's be real, that I don't want to handle. I want to fight that boss. Whatever that big scary thing is, like, that is what I'm seeking. Like, I want it in my face. I want to battle to the death with it. So I trust, let go, be open. I'm like, whatever, forget that thought. Inhale it. I'm like, tastes kind of funny. I took another hit, 2 hits in, big old guys, and hold my breath. And immediately, everything starts vibrating so intensely that it completely distorts the picture itself. It's not like the gentle mushroom hallucination. It's like, and I start focusing on my breath. I'm like, okay, well, this is before I had ever done any Vipassana or Anapana. I just instinctively was like, all right, just in through the nose, out through the mouth, count your breath. And time started to dilate, where I was like, and the physical sensation started to dilate as well, where I was like, whoa, we're only on 2 breaths now. Oh, and then my friend who I was with was like, yo, close your eyes. So I closed my eyes. And then the intensity that I was seeing out in the world compounded in my mind's eye. Fractals. So every psychedelic has its own unique manifestation of visuals. The ones that I got on mushrooms that first time, inside of my mind's eye, even hours after the main part of the trip was over, so beautiful. And I described what I saw in the ketamine. And here it was just classic fractals vibrating very intensely. And then I started to go through something, like through the fractals. And then boom, I was just in nothing. It's like in the Matrix when they're in the construct and everything is white. But here, everything was black, completely colorless. And I had the distinct awareness that 2 things, well, maybe 3. I was never going back to the body that hit that crack pipe on the couch. For all intents and purposes, I had shed that mortal coil permanently. But also that my consciousness and all of the memories, all of the emotions, all the everything, I retained. And then, at the same time, I was aware that I was measuring an earth time and that this had just happened, but I could feel there was a non-zero chance that I have been here for time immemorial, and here I will remain for time immemorial. And then I was just kind of there. And I did hear a voice, but it wasn't very clear, and I didn't meet any other beings. And then I opened my eyes, and I was back on the couch. So, MDMA. This is my favorite. So, I did MDMA about 18 months after my first psychedelic journey. And at this point, I was well practiced in the process of meeting with practitioners and facilitators and going after things and being aware of what I needed to go after, or sharing how much I was aware of and then letting them connect dots to point out maybe this is actually what you need to go after. So I was describing all of this to this practitioner who suggested actually that it was not mushrooms that I should do. He suggested MDMA, and I trusted this individual, and we went with it. What I had described that I was after was to be more present, whatever that definition meant to me at the time. I think if you asked me then, I probably couldn't articulate it. Now, especially following the Vipassana retreat, I have a much simpler, much clearer understanding of what that is. And I don't know that this journey, this MDMA journey, got me that definition. But it did do a lot, and it did give me what I needed. So MDMA, one of the things that it does is it shuts down the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is responsible for the fight or flight response, the fear part of your brain. So as far as I know, a bad trip is not possible on MDMA. This facility had a bed where you would lie down in. And I like structure. I like discipline. I like all this stuff, you know? Perfect external counterpart to the loose, fluid, very artistic, emotional side of me that also exists. So my bed is firm as can be, almost. And I lay down on this bed, and it's a Tempur-Pedic mattress, but it's also as soft of a mattress as Tempur-Pedic can make. And I was like, whoa, dude, okay, this is, okay. So we meditate, gives me the dose, set the intentions, and then we're off to the races. And I just start responding to his questions. He's prompting me with some things, what's coming up? What are you feeling? Because really what was behind that definition of presence, or what I ended up getting out of it that I needed, was super awareness, not of emotions, that I had emotions or that I could access them or release them, feel them, give grace to myself. But I started to get much clearer, very explicitly clear on where these emotions lived in my body and what thoughts or desires they were related to. So he would ask me, what are you feeling? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I would just start talking. And I was commenting on how I was feeling in this super soft bed. And what he pointed out to me is he was like, yeah, dude, you're safe. You're relaxed inside. And I realized then, I was like, oh my God, I have been in pursuit of and fascinated by, and like my mental safe space, what I call sleep tracks that I used to lull myself to sleep with. The theme is always total safety and security, while there's chaos and disorder raging outside. So somewhere, some part of me really was craving this. And even if I was safe and secure externally and as calm, as relaxed internally as I thought that I was, one of the things that this experience showed me was that I was not letting myself power down, not letting myself drop those guards internally. And I realized I have been living all of my life up until then in, at the very least, a low grade state of fight or flight. And that makes so much sense. How can you ever be emotionally or intellectually aware of anything if you have this low grade fight or flight adrenaline dump going on? Because when you are actually triggered, not the overused hijacked buzzword way of this day and age. When you are actually triggered, what happens is that your body dumps adrenaline, your heart rate spikes, your prefrontal cortex shuts down, which means that you cannot really articulate anything, and your awareness is very limited because you are hyper focused on just survival. And so with that being shut off, then my awareness was able to expand. And then I was like, dude, I just feel so good on this. And he was like, yeah, that's probably the amphetamines. And I was like, there's amphetamines in this? He was like, yeah, dude. I was like, okay. So it's basically truth serum. It's why, if you do Molly with somebody, especially at the right dose, or if you are intimate on Molly, you're going to fall deeply, deeply in love. So be very careful. And I just started talking, started sharing a bunch of stuff. I said some things that I had felt deeply, but I had been too afraid of sharing. And that's really important because in order to get what you want, you've got to know what you want. And the process for that, for me, the framework that I had followed for myself, or that I drew out of some experiences that I had in seeking to get what I wanted, was that first you have to have the clarity to know what it is that you want. Then you have to have the courage to speak it first to yourself and then to whoever else it's relevant for. And then you've got to have the confidence based in the discipline that you have or have built to go and get it, that you are going to make this happen. And other concepts that were put into my brain there during that journey were about masculine and feminine polarity and their roles. And each person, each individual, no matter what your biology is, you have to be aware of those elements inside of you and get them to work harmoniously in order for you to be healthy and integrated enough to go out into the world and be productive and healthy and get what you want, and not get what you want in a way that has integrity to yourself and also in your conduct and is not disruptive. And I started to realize so much in there because I was in this state, my awareness was building, and I was unafraid to share. So, never had a spiritual experience on psychedelics. But what I gained from my experience journeying has been tremendously impactful in accelerating my spiritual journey, in my being able to understand myself and be aware of what I am built for, how I can be most useful, how I can serve without additional friction. And being able to interpret with greater clarity and less bias, less lower self, little ego, signs that God is sending me. So the secondary effect of a psychedelic journey for me was spiritual. But the primary effect of it was building emotional awareness in order to facilitate real self-love. Because the courage to explore the darkness was already there, and the desire to explore the darkness was already there. I drank 10 years, from 15 to 25. And I was never like, oh, let's get like, wasted in the morning or whatever people's stereotype of an alcoholic is. I was not that. And I don't define myself as an alcoholic. I basically was a kid who had gone through a lot, and there was nobody in my life that I was afraid of or that I respected enough to monitor my conduct, to self-regulate my conduct, because I didn't care what anybody thought. And even though I had tremendous consequences. I mean, my first time drinking, I woke up in the hospital. I later ended up in a hospital again, so on and so forth. And that second time in the hospital, massive life-threatening injuries. I wasn't changing my conduct. And when I lived alone, I drank a lot. And what I would do is I would drink to blackout. I was not drinking to suppress anything. And I was aware of this even then. I was not drinking to suppress or not feel anything. I was drinking because I wanted to lower my consciousness so that I could dig into the darkness and see what was up. So you need all of these pieces to be working together in order to my path I would not recommend. And you don't need psychedelics. You don't need any of this external stuff to do this. And even if you do use this external stuff, that alone is not going to get you the results that you're looking for. There is no substitute for hard work. There is no substitute for committing to a practice. And this stuff only will yield results. That exposure doesn't matter if you don't do anything with it. To know and not do accrues a huge debt. You have to do something with the information that you're given. Which means you're applying it. These things come up and you have to notice them and you have to work through them and you have to find new ways of being than the way that you have been. You've got to have all of this stuff working together. And so maybe people get a spiritual experience because they have been disconnected from God, but they are already healthy and integrated emotionally. And they are able to be truly empathetic. I'm not ashamed to say that I was not, because I tried as best as I could and as I knew how to be so. But you get what you need. Psychedelics, I'm a lifetime natty, right? I'm natural in my pursuit of having an awesome body that complements your life without running it. And I have gotten pretty ridiculous results. However, I love to learn, and at some point, maybe I will do a cycle. And there have also been times when it's part of what got me into personal development in the first place was a steroid rabbit hole, because I grew up as a fat kid. That was my identity. I was the butt of every joke to my friends and to my not friends. So, I had my college girlfriend cheated on me. And even though I was in decent shape at the time, back then I was like, oh, this must be because I don't look like I hopped off the pages of a comic book. So I was digging down this, should I do steroids? What's up? How do I do steroids? What do I do? And that led me to some websites that were my gateway into personal development. So I looked down all these rabbit holes, Reddit, whatnot, and I realized it's not for me, not right now. And there's no judgment there. But one of the common themes is that doing steroids alone is not going to get you the results that you think you are going to get by doing them, or that most people think It's going to happen. You still have to be training just as hard and just as consistently as you would if you couldn't use steroids to take you to a supraphysiological level of hormones, take you beyond your natural limits. You still have to be dieting, not necessarily restricting calories, but eating intentionally and with discipline and consistently. In the same way, you still have to be sleeping and hydrating and lowering your stress. And I was going to say, maybe for me, I would like to get to my natural potential, my natural limit, and then do them. But there's room for discussion there about when it's advisable and in that journey and why. Steroids or psychedelics in that way are a lot like steroids for the soul. They can't do the work for you, but they can expose you on a shorter timeline to what you could be. It is such a fun and fascinating, mysterious and wonderful journey. All parts of knowing yourself, of which this is just one. Not psychedelics necessarily, but building emotional awareness in order to create, in order to have love for yourself. Because only then can you really start to have true selfless love for others. If you want to understand others, get to know yourself. I used to say, if you want to know yourself, understand others. And that's also valid, because the people that God brings into our lives are mirrors to what we have to work on or what we lack. Or they can be indicators of our current vibrational state. They can be guideposts or mile markers that we are on a certain direction. It's a mystery. I love it. All right, y'all. I think that's all that I've got to say here on psychedelics. At Michael Hewitt 23 on all social media platforms. Go forth and speak boldly.